The day I met my new neighbor, I was standing in the middle of the road with blood on my hands, a broken lunchbox at my feet, and the terrible feeling that my life had already ended even though I was still breathing. The sun was high, the street was quiet, and everyone in our small apartment lane had their curtains half open, watching the lonely man from apartment 3B fall apart in daylight. Then she walked past me, carrying a yellow umbrella even though there wasn't a cloud in the sky, and she smiled like she had known my pain before I ever spoke a word. She tilted her head, looked straight into my tired eyes, and said softly, "If you catch me, I'll let you remember how to live again." Before this story begins, please like, comment, share, and subscribe to the channel Asian Anesctory if you believe in kindness, second chances, and the kind of love that arrives when a person has almost stopped waiting for it. My name is Rayhan Qadri, and for almost 3 years, I had lived like a ghost in the old Gulmohar apartments, leaving before sunrise, returning after dark, speaking only when necessary, and keeping my heart locked behind the kind of silence people mistake for arrogance. But it was not arrogance. It was grief. My wife, Syra, had died on a bright Tuesday morning while crossing a market road to buy mangoes for our daughter's school lunch. Our daughter, Inaya, survived the accident, but the little girl who once sang to pigeons and drew suns with smiling faces disappeared that day too. She became quiet, frightened of roads, frightened of loud horns, frightened of happiness itself. I tried to be strong for her, but every time she looked at me with those wide, wounded eyes, I saw the question she never asked: why did Mama not come home? That morning, the morning my new neighbor arrived, Inaya had refused to go to school again. She was 7, thin as a reed, with hair she no longer allowed me to braid properly because Syra had been the one who knew how to do it without pulling. I had packed her lunch clumsily, burned one side of the paratha, cut apples into uneven pieces, and placed a tiny note inside that said, "Baba loves you." She saw the note, pushed the lunchbox away, and whispered that love did not stop people from leaving. I do not know what broke inside me then, but I carried the lunchbox out to the street after her school van left without her, and when I stumbled, it fell open. The apples rolled into the dust, the paratha landed near a tire mark, and I cut my palm on the metal latch while trying to gather everything before the neighbors could see. But grief has a cruel way of making small accidents feel like final defeats. That was when Meher Awan passed me for the first time. She had moved into apartment 3C, right across from mine, with 2 suitcases, a stack of books tied with rope, and that strange yellow umbrella. She was not young in the careless way of college girls, and not old in the tired way of people who have surrendered. She looked about 30, with gentle eyes, a calm face, and a limp so slight that most people might not notice unless they watched carefully. She did not rush to pity me. She did not ask what happened. She only crouched down, picked up the lunchbox lid, wiped it with the corner of her scarf, and placed it in my shaking hand. Then she smiled and said that sentence about catching her, as if life were a game and not a punishment. I should have ignored her. I should have gone back upstairs, washed my bleeding palm, and returned to my familiar darkness. But something about the way she walked away slowly, not looking back yet somehow inviting me to follow, stirred a forgotten instinct in me. Inaya was watching from the balcony, clutching the railing. For the first time in months, her face held something other than fear. Curiosity. So I followed Meher, first with irritation, then confusion, then breathless embarrassment as she led me around the apartment courtyard in broad daylight, past aunties watering plants, past children playing cricket, past the tea seller who stopped pouring to stare. She did not run fast. She could not, because of her limp. But she moved with playful dignity, turning corners, hiding behind bougainvillea, letting me almost reach her before slipping away. And when I finally caught up near the old neem tree, she did not laugh at me. She simply placed one hand against the bark, took a deep breath, and said life never comes back all at once. Sometimes it returns by making a grieving man walk one more lap than he planned. In the days that followed, Meher became a quiet disturbance in our building. She painted her door blue, hung wind chimes in the corridor, fed stray cats, and spoke to the security guard as if he were a respected elder. Every morning at 10, when sunlight filled the courtyard, she would walk with her yellow umbrella and call out small challenges to the children. If they caught her, she gave them wrapped candies, riddles, or paper stars with messages inside. Soon the courtyard, which had once felt like a parking lot for tired lives, became a place of laughter. Inaya watched from the balcony at first, hiding behind the curtain. Meher never forced her down. She simply looked up sometimes and waved, as if saving a place for her in the world. I learned that Meher had been a school art teacher before a bus accident injured her leg and took away the fiancé she was supposed to marry that winter. His name was not spoken with drama, only with reverence, as if she carried him like a folded letter inside her heart. She had come to Gulmohar Apartments because the old city was cheaper and because, as she once told me while watering basil pots, every broken person needs a new window. I did not know how to answer. I was still a man who believed broken things stayed broken. But Meher lived differently. She moved through pain as if it were not an enemy, but a heavy basket she had learned to carry without dropping the flowers inside. Slowly, Inaya began to change. First, she opened the balcony door. Then she stood outside it. Then one afternoon, while the sun warmed the tiles and the courtyard smelled of frying onions and wet soil, Meher looked up and called to her that she had hidden a blue paper bird somewhere below, and only a brave girl with sharp eyes could find it. Inaya shook her head, but she did not go inside. The next day, Meher hid another bird. On the third day, Inaya came downstairs holding my hand so tightly my fingers hurt. She did not speak. She only searched behind flower pots until she found the bird tucked inside a cracked clay cup. On it, Meher had written, "Small wings are still wings." Inaya read it 3 times, then pressed it to her chest. But healing is never a straight road. The first time a motorcycle backfired outside the gate, Inaya screamed and collapsed on the stairs. I froze, useless, dragged back into the memory of Cyrus' accident so violently that I could smell burnt rubber again. Neighbors gathered. Someone called for water. Someone told Inaya to stop crying. Then Meher pushed through the crowd, lowered herself painfully onto the step beside my daughter, and opened the yellow umbrella above them both. She told Inaya to look at the color, only the color, and breathe as if she were blowing clouds away. I watched my daughter's sobs slowly soften under that ridiculous umbrella, watched Meher shield her from staring eyes, watched the first true gratitude I had felt in years rise in my throat like prayer. After that day, Meher and Inaya became companions of the daylight. They painted stones with tiny houses, planted coriander in old tins, and made a rule that every sad morning must be given at least one beautiful thing before noon. Sometimes I found them sitting near the gate, counting red cars, teaching each other bird names, or drawing chalk rivers across the courtyard floor. I began coming home earlier. I began cooking better. I began trimming my beard, cleaning the apartment, opening curtains. One evening, Inaya asked me to tell her a story about her mother without crying. I failed, but I tried, and for the first time, she rested her head against my shoulder instead of pulling away. The suspense of our lives returned not as danger, but as fear of hope. I was afraid of needing Meher. I was afraid Inaya would love her and lose her too. I was afraid my dead wife would become a memory instead of the center of every breath. Meher sensed this, because people who have suffered deeply can hear silence better than words. One afternoon, she came to return a book and found me staring at Cyrus' photograph. The room was full of sunlight, and dust moved through it like tiny spirits. Meher did not step too close. She said love is not a house with only one room. It is a courtyard. More people can enter, and the ones who left are not pushed out. I wanted to argue, but her eyes were wet, and I understood she was speaking to herself too. Then came the school sports day, the event Inaya had dreaded for weeks. Her teacher had called to say she could simply attend, no pressure to participate, but Meher had been practicing a slow walking race with her in the courtyard. Not a race to win, Meher said, a race to arrive. The morning was bright, almost painfully beautiful. Children ran across the school ground in white uniforms, parents clapped, whistles blew, and balloons trembled in the warm wind. Inaya stood at the starting line for the small children's fun race, her face pale, her fingers searching for mine. Across the field, Meher stood with her yellow umbrella folded under one arm, smiling. When the whistle blew, most children ran ahead. Inaya took one step and froze as a car horn sounded from the road beyond the wall. I saw terror swallow her. I started forward, but Meher raised a hand gently, stopping me. Then, with her limp more visible than ever, she stepped onto the side of the track and began walking backward, just ahead of Inaya, smiling the same smile she had given me on the day I broke in the street. Her lips formed the words I could not hear but understood, "Catch me." Inaya took one trembling step. Then another. The crowd faded. The winners crossed the finish line, but nobody mattered except my little girl walking through the storm inside her own chest. Parents turned. Teachers grew quiet. Meher kept moving backward, slow and steady, until Inaya finally reached her and grabbed her scarf with both hands. Then my daughter laughed. Not loudly, not perfectly, but truly. It was the sound of a locked door opening after years of rust. That evening, our building held an unplanned celebration. Someone brought samosas, someone made tea, children begged Meher for more paper stars, and Inaya placed her Sports Day participation ribbon around Cyrus' photograph before placing it around her own neck. I stood in the doorway watching it all, overwhelmed by the strange mercy of ordinary days. Meher stood beside me, her umbrella leaning against the wall. I told her I had caught her that first morning, but she had been the one who caught us. She smiled without looking at me and said maybe broken people are not meant to fix each other, only to sit close enough that the pieces do not feel so lonely. Months passed, and Gulmohar Apartments changed around her. The old gardener began planting marigolds again. The children stopped playing only on screens. Neighbors who once fought over parking began sharing evening tea. And in apartment 3B, a father and daughter learned the difficult art of living after loss. We still cried. We still missed Syra. Some mornings still arrived heavy. But now Inaya braided her own hair with uneven ribbons and told me Mama would have laughed at my cooking. Now I could walk past the market road without feeling the earth disappear beneath me. Now there was room in our home for memory and tomorrow. Near the end of that summer, Meher's leg worsened. The doctors recommended surgery she had delayed for years because she feared hospitals, feared hope, feared waking up to disappointment. This time, she did not face it alone. The entire building gathered before her taxi arrived. Children handed her paper stars. The tea seller gave her a flask. Inaya gave her the blue paper bird she had found months ago, now softened at the edges from being held so often. Meher cried then, quietly, with one hand over her mouth. Before getting into the taxi, she looked at Inaya and me and said that when she returned, she expected us both to catch her again, but faster this time. If this story touched your heart, please like, comment, share, and subscribe to Asian Anesctory, because stories like this remind us that one gentle person can bring daylight back into an entire life. The surgery was successful. When Meher came back weeks later, walking slowly with a cane, the courtyard was decorated with yellow ribbons. Inaya ran first, then stopped, remembering fear, remembering caution, remembering courage. Meher opened her arms. My daughter ran again and caught her around the waist, both of them laughing and crying under the full afternoon sun. I stood behind them, no longer the man with blood on his hands and a broken lunchbox at his feet, but a father who had learned that grief does not end, it softens when love keeps knocking. Please comment, kindness gives life a second chance, if you believe even one small act can save a hurting heart. Years later, whenever people asked how our family began again, Inaya would point to the yellow umbrella hanging near our door and say a neighbor brought the sun with her. And I would remember that first morning, the dust, the spilled apples, the wound in my palm, and a woman with a limp smiling as she passed me. I had thought she was asking me to chase her. But she was really asking me to follow life, one painful step at a time, until I could finally catch up with hope.